Right. As everybody know, I'm Kwame Shakur, Minister of Culture of the New African Black Panther Party. For now on, I'm going to be going live on Facebook instead, read from my book until I finish it all the way out. That'll be every Monday and Thursday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. So if you want to jump on, check that out. That'd be every Monday and Tuesday. As I said, the last time I read from chapter 3 and other chapters, I was always going to read the very beginning, the dedication of this book, because it's an important reason why I also wrote this book, amongst a number of other things. So I'm going to start this off. It's from my book, Kwame Shakur. It's my search for answers, truth, and meaning, the autobiography of Kwame Shakur. It says, this book is dedicated to Leon Benson and Rural Amos, who have spent over 23 years and over 15 years respectively in prisons for crimes that the state of Indiana knows they didn't commit. I also dedicate this book to Alonzo Hayes, my stepfather, who passed away in 2020. So I'm going to start with chapter 4. A lot of y'all know that they recently banned my book in all Indiana prisons. This right here, this is what they say is such a threat. The reason that they're using it, I look at it as being a bigger issue than just them saying I'm glorifying gangs in my book, because I don't glorify nothing about gang culture in my book whatsoever. If anything, I'm talking about the stuff that was going on there that I thought was principle amongst them, but I was also trying to educate them and work with them, because I feel like people that go to prison in general can be the solution to the problem, or they can become a problem, continue to be the problem. So their allegations of saying that this was glorification of gang culture is absolutely false. They're just trying to use that, just like they did with the original Black Panther Party, to tag this as a security threat, so they can therefore put a security threat on the New African Black Panther Party afterwards. And I'm definitely going to challenge that. I don't think it's going to stand up, so stay tuned for that. But this is chapter 4. It's called Turning a New Leaf. Like I said in my book, I keep it all the way real. I even talk about my criminal mentality at USC, how that evolves over time as I go further on and read in my book, and how it transforms into a revolutionary mentality. After I finish reading this chapter 4, I'll leave it open for any questions, a few questions. So anybody that's watching right now, you can definitely ask questions after I get done. So with that said, I'm going to start with chapter 4, called Turning a New Leaf. It says, shakedown on 300. Anytime there was solid prisoners on any unit and the correctional officers was coming on the unit to shake down, some of the guys would yell out through their doors that they were about to shake someone down to give everyone else a heads up. Roll 309, the CO said, standing at my door. Seeing that I was the one getting shook down, I stepped out of the cell and went and sat down on the metal chow hall food bench we all sat on during chow. One was located right in front of my cell. The 2 correctional officers then went into my cell and started going through it from top to bottom. My cellie CC was at work, so I watched at a distance while they went through both of our properties. I had been in prison for nearly 9 months by this time, and I've been through this procedure several times, so I was accustomed to being violated in this way. However, no matter how many shakedowns you go through, you never quite accept it. You don't know to what extent they will tear up your cell afterwards. And you knew that many of these shakedowns were a part of the prison's staff's way to just harass you and dehumanize you. Sometimes they wouldn't be looking for anything in particular. By the time they finished going through your cell, it looked more like a landfill with everything trashed and unrecognizable than the cell that you had to live in. It would leave you so bitter and angry that in time, it would make you increasingly grow to hate the guards entirely. Your personal mail will be mixed up with your legal mail at times. Sometimes your Cellies property will be mixed up with yours as well. I remember one time I walked back in my cell, my washcloth and towel was lying in the toilet. There was no rehabilitative purpose to something like that. It was outright disrespect and a way to terrorize you. I had times where they would take some of my cough drops and be eating them on the way out laughing. It didn't take long before the prison staff and I became mortal enemies. I didn't identify with too many of them. Even the ones that didn't fuck with you and treated you with some respect, I didn't make it my mission to overstep the boundaries between us versus them. I knew if placed in the right situation, they would stick to the blue code of silence and possibly be forced to be on some bullshit too in order to please their superiors and higher ranking officers. Why are y'all taking my soap and toothbrushes though? I said as I watched them throw a few of my hygiene items into a trash bag. Because according to policy, you're only supposed to have one toothbrush and no more than 2 bars of soap. I swear y'all break that same policy every day when y'all want to harass us. Y'all use that same policy to do so. We're just following procedures. You're not supposed to have no more than allowed hygiene items in your cell, the white female CO said. The other CO that was shaking me down was a black heavy-set dude. He didn't say anything. I had seen this shakedown crew before, so I knew what time it was. He would go along with whatever the other white officers did, a straight house nigga. There was a lot of black correctional officers who was nothing more than black on the outside, but white supremacists supporting caste in how they operated around the prison. It didn't take me long to realize that a lot of times it didn't matter what color the officers were. The black ones were often just as bad or even worse, since they would try to prove their loyalty to their white counterparts. When I went back into my cell, I noticed all of my property and CCs were still separated. It hadn't been the worst shakedown this particular time. They just took a lot of miscellaneous stuff as they always did and all the extra hygiene we had. I was most certainly mad about the hygiene being taken, but I figured I would just have to replace it. All the officers knew that we had all had extra hygiene. It would be foolish if you didn't keep it. Most would never even put a hand on it because everyone had extra hygiene, just in case we went on lockdown or somebody needed a bar of soap or something. Some guys would keep lots of it. I personally only had a few extra of everything, not only because I didn't want an asshole to shake me down and use that to harass me, but my money was limited. I didn't get a lot of money from my family that I could afford to lose. Around the time of this shakedown, I was on idle with pay since the yo-yo factory had recently been taken out of the prison. I'm not going to lie. I was actually happy and felt fortunate when I got this prison job. This was the first of its kind at Wabash Valley Correctional Facility. We were getting paid actual minimum wages like we were at a real job on the outside. I was making $6.99 an hour. We had to go through an interview process and everything to get one of the 3 shifts they had. Because I had just gotten to the prison and didn't have any write-ups at the time, these job openings opened up. I was given one of those positions. Under prison conditions, this was equivalent to working at Ford Motors when they first became a blue-collar job to have in Detroit. The only downside was that you had to pay half of what you made every 2 weeks to room and board, which went straight to the prison. And if there was a victim or victims in your case, or you had to pay child support, they would take that out of your paychecks as well. Since they recovered the bank money and I didn't have any kids, I was left with $150 or more in my prison account every 2 weeks. Again, under prison conditions, I was part of this new middle class they had created. If you had a yo-yo factory job, you could buy all the tobacco, weed, or drugs you wanted from a lot of the drug dealers. They knew you were good for it up to a point. Most of the money I made, I saved up for a lawyer and to support myself. That lasted from May 99 to October 99. Then they outsourced our cheap labor to Mexico, I heard. When that happened, we were all given a pay while we were on idle with pay. I think that amounted to $50 a month. Looking back on the yo-yo factory job I had for a short stint, I can see why corporations partner with prisons would take advantage of prison slave labor like they did. While many companies were outsourcing to other countries, many turned to insourcing domestic prison labor. Not only did the prisons make a lot of money just off of what we paid them with the room and board deduction they made off of our free labor. These corporations made a killing off of a controlled labor force that was very malleable. What I mean by that is that they could fire you for no reason. They could speed up production and manipulate you to comply if you wanted to keep your job. They had a workforce with no union protections, so you couldn't strike or try to negotiate for higher wages. It was literally a modern day slave plantation, yet we were happier slaves since it afforded us a means to support ourselves while we were down. Because most guys had habits of various kinds, it gave us the means to support our addictions as well. I noticed during my first year in prison how plentiful drugs and all kinds of contraband was. Living inside a prison was like living inside a small town. You had your drug dealers and you had your population of drug users. You had guys with cliques, usually guys are part of the same gang or from the same town or city who were the shot callers, the predators, the guys that had social status amongst the prison population. Then on the other hand, you had regular people that went to work every day inside just to survive. You had the correctional staff who would bring in the drugs, knives, or cell phones and make a killing off our black market. When the cell phones became popular at one point in time, a correctional officer could easily make up to $2,000 off of one phone. It became bigger than drugs. At certain prisons, the correctional staff had their own contraband rings. Prison life opened my eyes to how ridiculous so-called penal rehabilitation was. If you was a drug dealer on the outside, you were more than likely one on the inside too. If you was a drug user on the outside, you were more than likely a drug user on the inside as well. The biggest difference between the two was the cost and price margins for everything. All drugs and contraband were sold at a higher price on the inside due to the smuggling fees that were added on to the price, as well as the monopolization of all contraband by a smaller number of individuals controlling the market. A little bit of weed that was only enough to roll up two joints went for 25 set market prices. If you were really cool with the guy, you could get that same bag for $8 and he could still make a profit off the sale. When I first witnessed how they measured those bags, I felt like I was being fucked with a spiked dick with no grease. They would literally fill up a chapstick cap and then place it in a folded piece of paper. Most of the time, it was prepackaged and held in a sack of 25 or 50 like a drug dealer would on the streets, so they could easily distribute it as customers came and went. One of the first dope fiends I met and got cool with was this brother named Shorty. He reminded me of Ezell character in the movie Friday. He was always hustling just to buy some more crack. When he told me the reason that he was in prison was for drugs, I thought that was the most ironic shit I ever heard. The state of Indiana had given this brother 50 years for a little bit of drug possession. Like many brothers who the police swept up every so often and broadcasted on the news whenever they made these sort of small-time drug arrests. Shorty had been one of those dope fiends arrested and sent away for a long time. When he got to prison, he kept doing what he was doing on the streets, getting high. Witnessing people like him and seeing the real dynamic of prison life, I realized that prisons aren't going to ever solve many of the problems that affect black, brown, and lower class people. It actually reinforces a criminal behavior and makes it more hardened and solidified. I remember hearing a lot of politicians talking about getting tough on crime, building more prisons, and the need to give people longer sentences during the height of the war on drugs. But all these policies had only led to a higher prison population of black and brown people, overcrowded, and a growing population of people who would be hardened criminals by the time they were released to the free world. Prison just teaches people how to be a better criminal and be better capable of eluding law enforcement techniques. For example, I had always kept at least one knife in my prison cell nearly every shakedown I ever experienced whenever I was in the general prison population. The guards never found any knife I had ever stashed in my cell. Like in the streets, it was more wise to have weapons for defense and protection than to get caught slipping. I don't care how often the guards shook us down every year and found a few knives. Every last one of us either had a knife in our possession or had access to someone's knife. Sometimes we didn't keep it in our cells. However, they weren't far from being accessed whenever we left our cell. That was just a part of prison life and culture. If you didn't possess a mindset like that before you went to prison, you sure developed that mindset once you spent enough time in there and witnessed or heard about other guys being stabbed or killed. That's a part of the culture that will never change. For a drug addict to go to prison and have to endure that sort of culture and lifestyle, you transform what was originally just a medical disease into a criminal disease of survival. Now, when that drug addict leaves prison, not only does he still have the same drug addiction he had when he came in, or even worse, he's more sophisticated criminal that's discovered how to support that addiction in many socially dysfunctional ways of criminality. This person may have become transformed into a person with a psychopathic disposition if they endured a lot of torture and never self-evaluated and struggled against their social conditioning. I came across a lot of shorties in prison. I think they would have been better off if their addiction was addressed medically rather than penally. Man, I need a hawk, Buddy said, referring to the prison knife he knew I kept in my cell. Wow, what's up? I said, let's go in the cell and talk. We walked into the cell and he went on to explain to me how this motherfucker named Gangster Brown had basically implied to everyone in his GD class that he was a snitch. Because Buddy had been sent to lock up for a recent write-up that he had gone to the Conduct Adjustment Board for, Gangster Brown felt it was more to it. What? I said indignantly. Yeah, man, he said this in the front of the whole class. I'm shitty as fuck, and I'm not letting this one go. I feel you. I wouldn't either, I said angrily. Instead of stabbing him, my guy, and you catching another case, let's just beat the fuck out of him. And that way we will send a message to everyone that we weren't going to allow people to put bullshit up on our names. We weren't going to let that shit ride, period. CC walked into the room and we told him what was going on, too. We all had a problem with Gangster Brown at one point or another, so we all agreed that we were going to jump him when we came back from inside rec later that night. Gangster Brown was a brother who had been transferred from Indiana State Prison a few months before. He had been down for about 15 years and was on swole. He was a real-life Debo character. A few weeks before, he had gotten into a pushing match with this brother named Heavy D on the unit. We kind of felt sorry for Heavy D because Gangster Brown had pulled his whole cart in front of everybody in the cell house during lunch one day. After that, he started to walk around like he was the biggest and baddest motherfucker in the cell house. One thing I had always hated was a bully that was what he was coming off as. The fact that he did that to Buddy, my ace boon coon, I knew he had really bought that bottle of beer. It would have been different if his allegations were true, but I knew they weren't. Buddy just hadn't gotten a lot of write-ups since he had just started his sentence at this point in his prison bit. Because of that, they weren't likely to send you to lockup if you received a Class B write-up. You just couldn't have a job or go to school anymore for like 90 or 180 days. They may have moved you to another cell house possibly, but that wasn't something they did right away. I guess because they sent guys to segregation more often at the prison he had come from, Gangster Brown assumed that what would have happened to Buddy too. Well, he was wrong, and we decided to pumpkinhead him for buying that bottle of beer. One of the worst things you can call a stand-up dude in prison, in my opinion, was a snitch. You better know your facts before you falsely accuse someone of that and try to put that jacket on them. They had every right to retaliate if that jacket didn't fit, and we did. We were determined to set an example. Later that night, Buddy, CC, and I stayed in from outside recreation. We wanted to plan our attack on Gangster Brown when he came back in from outside recreation. He stayed in the cell next door to us, in cell 310. We decided we were all rushing in his cell when he went into his cell and jump him in there so as not to get caught. None of us wanted to go to lockup, so we hatched a plan that would allow us to complete our mission and not be punished by the prison for it. We knew that all the correctional officers would be preoccupied with everyone coming back from recreation, leaving the day room free of a lot of staff to view us. I think I was the most hyped up out of all of us. I was ready to turn a new leaf in prison. I had already lost my yo-yo factory job since they had taken it out of the prison. Peaches and I broken up about 5 months prior, so I didn't have love to worry about anymore. I was growing more and more angry by the day as I started having more and more confrontations with the correctional officers. It seemed like they would go out of their ways to dehumanize you and use their badge to oppress you. If it wasn't the disrespectful way they would shake our cells down, it would be just the way they would condescendingly talk to you. Sometimes they wouldn't even have to be talking to me. If I heard them talking to another prisoner in a disrespectful manner, that would anger me. To me, I felt that all of them should treat us with a basic modicum of respect, at least. We were the gatekeepers over their lives. If you think about it, many of us had nothing to lose. They had families they could go to every night. If we ever got pushed to our limits, we could make sure we could interrupt all of that. Many of the correctional staff didn't seem to realize that by how they indiscriminately treated us as if we were all the same. I had got tired of trying to be good and trying to stay out of trouble. I was more than ready to start busting heads and taking names, no matter if it meant fucking the police up in there or prisoners who crossed the line too. I wasn't going to discriminate. When we heard everyone coming back in from rec and heard Gangster Brown's cell door open, I stepped out the cell, leaving Buddy and CC inside. I told them I would post up at the table in front of his cell and wait for them. It was obvious that we were up to something because Gangster Brown was on guard immediately. His cell door was wide open, something he never did. I saw him tighten up his laces on his boots and the belt around his waist. He definitely knew we were about to come at him. I really did care though. I was just wondering what was taking Buddy and CC so long to come out the cell. I wasn't trying to jump him in the day room and get caught, but he left no other option. Not too long after I posted up at the metal child hall food bench, he exited his cell and started to approach me. I was on the other side of the metal table with one of my shoes on the stool and the other on the ground. "You got something on your mind, youngster?" he said, coming out of his cell. I didn't say anything. I just kept shifting my eyes from him to my cell, waiting on Buddy and CC to exit. No sooner than he said that, Gangster Brown began making his way towards me. As he walked around the table with his back to my cell, I rose up from my position and got on guard. I remember thinking to myself, if somebody doesn't come out and help me soon, this is going to be a big problem for me to tackle by myself. Buddy must have been reading my mind because he came out the cell and hurriedly ran over to where he and Gangster Brown was. Jumping on the table, Buddy Superman punched Gangster Brown right in the face as soon as he turned around. I quickly ran up to him, grabbed him around the waist and brought my right leg around his, a classic takedown move that I had been accustomed to using to take people to the ground. One of the first lessons you learn when you're being jumped is to stay on your feet. Gangster Brown must have never got that memo from his life lessons. As soon as he hit the ground, we were on him. I figured I would serve my purpose best by just holding him to the ground while Buddy and CC went to work on his face and body. We hadn't planned to execute our plan in this fashion, but you don't always know how a fight will play out until you're in the midst of the commotion. I realized if he got up, he would have been a harder time fucking his ass up, so I sacrificed for the team and kept him to the ground with some of the wrestling techniques I had mastered in our fights I had gotten into over the years. I had always been a great wrestler. In high school, the high school wrestling coach had wanted me to try out for the team. Freshman year, he had already decided I would be on the varsity team by the way I manhandled some of the other heavier guys in my gym class. All of those techniques I had put to use as I heard Buddy and CC raining down punches on him. But Brown stood no chance to recover after I got him to the ground and my guys were on him like a pack of wolves. I remember hearing their fists beat against his face as I maneuvered to get a better leverage over him. I must say Buddy was the most active of the two. He applied non-stop aggression to his cranium. CC had delivered a few decisive blows, then he melted back into the crowd that was circling around us. We had the whole attention of the entire cell house. I think many people were glad that we were bringing our youthful justice to Gangster Brown. Even though we weren't the underdogs due to the force we brought, we were the executioners of the collective disdain that others had started to develop for this bully. "Everyone lock up in their cells," the pod officer said over the intercom. As quickly as it started, it was over. The response team entered the cell house nearly 10 deep. Buddy and I hit the floor and put our hands behind our back so as not to get manhandled by them. Because CC got his punches in early and blended back into the crowd, they didn't bring him to the desegregation unit until later that night. For a minute, we thought CC had gotten away. I'm not sure how they ended up finding out that CC was a part of it too. Most likely one of the other prisoners had cinched him out. By the time the night was over, all four of us, including Gangster Brown, was sitting on lockup awaiting the conduct adjustment board. Miller, the CO, said, "You've been moved to CE cell house. You're going to cell 412 on the left side." Okay. The Conduct Adjustment Board found me and Buddy guilty of a Class B write-up we were given. CC got found not guilty behind the incident. One of the correctional officers in F. Cellies had written a statement for him, so he was sent back to F. Cellies and given his job back. Gangster Brown had been found not guilty, but he was still transferred to G. Cellies. Before we left D.C., Gangster Brown had apologized to all of us for implying that Buddy had snitched on his last write-up. He admitted that he was wrong for that and didn't want any further problems out of us. I didn't realize how bad we had beaten him up until I saw the huge black eye that had left one of his eyes shut closed. I knew once others in the prison population saw him, everybody would know we were a clique that wasn't going to allow shit to slide if anyone disrespected us. We would retaliate and do so with a vengeance. My new leaf had been turned. Several weeks after being moved to the left side of E cell house, Buddy got moved to E as well. We picked right back up where we had left off. The difference now was that we had a reputation for being youngsters who would put in work if need be. I was initially cautious about how the GDs would feel about what we had done to one of their gang members, but all of them were cool with what we had done. Word got around that Gangster Brown had one of those types of cases that a lot of guys couldn't respect. I'm not sure how true it was because I never looked into it myself, but I heard that he had one of those fucked up cases. After I heard about that, I felt he should have been forced into one of the protected custody units anyway and never allowed in general population, especially walking around like he was big and bad. My first year in prison, I realized a lot of bullshit was allowed that I felt was unprincipled. Some of the weak snitches were set out and preyed upon, while the ones who would stab you up and would attempt to kill you were whispered about at best. I didn't feel the double standards I witnessed as time passed, but I did feel it was my responsibility to rectify every situation I came across. So I had a policy of just cutting off those guys who had done fucked up shit in their past. The first couple months in East Cell House, we went on lockdown several times. I didn't mind because I preferred being around prisoners who were more rebellious against the correctional staff and didn't mind showing it. They would lock us down for any and everything. They would use collective punishment to try to turn us against each other, but most of us saw through that shit. So anytime they locked us down, we just made the correctional officers work harder. Instead of throwing all of our trash away when the guards came around to pick up trash, we would trash the unit by throwing all trash out of our cuff ports into the day room. The guards were so used to that they would just go around picking up the trash off the floor by the time their shift was over. Sometimes some of us would save our milk, and when we felt they were good and spoiled, we would throw them out the cup port onto the day room too. By the end of the guard shift, the whole day room would reek with spoiled milk mixed with other smells. That was our collective punishment, and it often worked to our advantage because the guards would want the lockdown to end so the prisoners could return to work and they wouldn't be forced to do everything themselves. I had a cool cellie in E. Big L was from Fort Wayne, I think, and we got along fine, lockdown or no lockdown. Most of the times when they did lock us down, we would still get visits. Having him for a cellie worked out perfectly. I had taught myself how to braid my own hair before coming to E, and Big L already knew how to braid himself, so we both agreed to do each other's hair for free. The fact that I had done time in boys' school and in the county jail, I had gotten used to other men braiding my hair without feeling uncomfortable about it. It was just a part of doing time. Besides, I figured it would give me an opportunity to perfect my own skills. At the time, I could only plait my hair or put connects in them. I wanted to get good enough to even French braid my own hair. It would be years later before I would get to that point, but I eventually did. Braiding my own hair saved me a lot of money in prison because it made me self-reliant. There's nothing like being self-reliant, no matter if it's an individual level or on a community level. As me and Big L demonstrated by exchanging our hair braiding service to help each other, on a community level, we all have skills that can be exchanged to get our own communities to self-reliance as well. This was a lesson I first started to learn while serving time, but wouldn't be one I would easily forget. The summer of 2000, I played a lot more basketball out at rec than I had done the previous year. East Cell House had the best basketball team, and I wanted our team to beat them, so I practiced a lot. Anytime there was a pickup game going on, I would work on my game to prepare myself for them. They had a guy on their team by the name of LT who could easily have gone to Division I basketball to play, college to play basketball. That's how good a lot of us thought he was. I remember a number of times Lil Keithy, who was their point guard and had a nice game himself on fast breaks, would give LT an alley-oop. The crowd would go wild on the sideline. Anytime they played, everyone in the yard would crowd around and watch them play. If I had to compare them to a college basketball team, I would have to say they played a lot like the Fab Five, which was my favorite Michigan Wolverine basketball squad. I forget which cell house we had played the particular day out at rec, but I remember Commissary was running around the same time as our basketball game. Right after our game ended, I hurriedly ran over to the building that handed out our commissary every week. It was a pretty long line. By the time I received my bag and had got back to our cell house, me and one of my basketball teammates noticed that everyone was locked in their cell. We both asked the floor officer if he minded if we took a shower since we were still sweaty from our basketball game. He told us that we could. I knew count time was in about an hour, so I hurried to my cell. As soon as I walked in my cell and threw my bag on the bed, the pod officer in the control area electronically started to roll my door shut. I snatched it back open before it can close. Looking up to the control pod, I yelled, "The floor officer told me I could take a quick shower since we had a basketball game this morning." I knew he already knew that because he led my teammate back into his cell to get his shower and stuff. He was already headed towards the shower. I figured after I told him that, he was going to honor the floor officer by letting me get my shower as well. As soon as I went back into my cell and started gathering my shower stuff, though, he electronically rolled my cell door shut again. I was pissed. "Can you tell him to open my cell so I can take my shower?" I yelled out of my cupboard talking to the floor officer. Instead of rectifying the situation, he acted like he couldn't do anything. "I need to talk to a sergeant," I bellowed. Again, instead of rectifying the situation with the control pod officer, he simply acted like there was nothing he could do. I was seething with anger. I paced back and forth on my cell and told Big L how I was getting tired of how these guards would practically do what the fuck they wanted. No matter if we weren't in the wrong, they would show us time and time again that they would completely disregard our efforts to resolve any grievance we had. And that became all the more apparent when the sergeant came on the unit with the nurse. "Sarge," I yelled through the cupboard, "I need to talk to you when you get a chance." He looked up at my cell but didn't even acknowledge me. All he had to do was say that he would come and see what the problem was after he finished walking around with the nurse to pass out medication. Instead, he didn't even acknowledge me. I tried to hold my anger in, but that pissed me off even more. According to Indiana Department of Corrections policy and procedures, a prisoner had to attempt to resolve any grievance they had with his shift supervisor or officer in charge of the unit before filing a formal grievance. When I heard the main door open to the hall and the sergeant started walking towards the exit without addressing my issue, I yelled out, "Sergeant Ash, I said I need to talk to you." I forget what he said, but he walked off the unit without addressing my issue. I was boiling with anger. It didn't matter if we tried to follow their policy and procedures. I had witnessed for over a year how they would arbitrarily do what they wanted. And if they observed their fellow officers being vindictive or arbitrary, they would simply go along with them and try to justify their actions. I was getting tired of having to deal with that shit. After a while, you begin to feel defeated and dehumanized. I had never been the type of person who would hold my tongue in relation to arbitrary authority too long before I took matters into my own hands. What the sergeant did next left me no other choice. I would say about 30 minutes or so had passed when I heard my door roll. That caught me off guard because I knew it was count time and everything was supposed to be on lockdown during count time. When I walked to the door to see what was going on, Sergeant Ash appeared. Standing right in my face, he growled, "You don't tell me what to do. If I want to come up here and talk to you, I will. If I don't, I won't. I determine everything that goes around here, not inmates." He set down his own rules and regulations. I smiled because I knew he had bought that bottle of beer. I was fed up with how arbitrary most of the prison staff were. I heard them call dudes boys, and some of them even had white supremacist tattoos. Before I had arrived at that prison, I heard about one guard even hanging a noose from the control pod and hadn't been disciplined for it. There was no question in my mind that I was dealing with many white people who thought they were superior to their black prison population. It wasn't always what they would say, but how they treated you and their tone towards you. They would normally talk to you in a very condescending manner. Most of the time, I try to avoid even have to deal with them because I knew I wasn't a turn the other cheek type of Negro. I was one of them. I was one of them. I will fuck you clean up field niggas. By the time he finished telling me who the sheriff of his town was, I had already decided I would set it off before the day was over. Many of us had been discussing our desire to fuck the guards up. I was at that point and beyond. I wanted to bust open some heads. I didn't care about the consequences any longer. I was ready to completely turn over a new leaf in my prison bit. Buddy must have been reading my mind, must have read my mind, because as soon as Sergeant Ash walked off the unit and the floor officer went into the hall with him, he was stooping down at his cupboard looking my way. I lipped to Buddy that we was gonna fuck up all the guards when we came out for lunch. Several other guys who had discussed with me their desire to fuck up the guards as well, I had sent them kites, a prison letter, outlining the same thing. Before the doors opened for lunch, I told Big L how much it was a pleasure being in Cellies, and I wished him well if our paths didn't cross again. When our cell doors rolled for lunch, I headed downstairs as unexpectedly as I could. I didn't want to tip the guards off. Sergeant Ash was standing by the opposite stairs in front of the chow hall mobile food carts. I headed towards the floor officer's area to grab my spoon like everyone else. None of the guards seemed to suspect anything. After grabbing my spoon, I approached the area where Sergeant Ash was standing. My right hand had been in my right pocket since leaving my cell. Now that I had gotten in the swinging distance of the sergeant, I pulled my hand out, revealing the lock in a sock that was wrapped around my hand. I had caught him completely off guard. Swinging the lock and the sock at his head like Samson in the Bible, I tried to take him out with one blow. Boom! I had planned on the lock busting through the sock I had put in it, but it did. Luckily, it hadn't hit any of the other prisoners standing in line. Instead, it crashed loudly against the side door leading to the other side of the cell house. For a split moment, I had paused in shock that the lock had bust right through the sock I had placed it in. I should have put it into 2 socks instead of 1, but I never hit someone in the head with a lock in a sock before, so I hadn't given the number of socks needed much thought. Undeterred, though, I remember Buddy coming from nowhere and hitting Sergeant Ash square in the face. He immediately dropped to the floor and covered up. Buddy and I commenced to kicking him in the ribs and face repeatedly. The floor officer at one point tried to run up on us, but I acted like I was going to go after him, so he retreated back to his floor podium. After he ran off, I could continue kicking and punching Sergeant Ash. Even though I was elated to finally be getting a year and a half of frustration out, I was wondering why some of the other prisoners wasn't busting the other guards' heads at least. I realized all those other dudes were all talk. When it came down to it, they weren't really about that life. What happened next really caught me off guard. I felt someone grab me and try to pull me off the sergeant. I thought one of the guards had sneaked through the side door and had caught me off guard. But when I turned around and saw that it was another prisoner, a black one at that, I shook him off of me and squared up on him. I couldn't believe it. It was one of the guys I had first entered the prison with. He was from Naptown and everything, too. And here he was trying to save one of the guards. Some of the slave-minded shit I would witness while I was in prison. I wouldn't have believed it if I hadn't experienced it myself. I would disclose his name, but I'm hoping he has repented of his sins since then. The fact that this house nigga had distracted me, the other guard had gotten the opportunity to run up on Buddy and mace him. He maced him all in his face. Mind you, this guard was much bigger than Buddy and I, but when I acted like I was going to jump on him for macing my guy, he retreated back to the podium again. Coward-ass motherfucker. After his coward ass ran back off, I stooped down and began hitting the sergeant in his head with all my might. After the 5th or 6th blow, my pointer finger knuckle pushed back into my hand. The pain that shot through me made me halt my aggression instantly. No sooner than I had stopped my aggression, the response team was busting through the side door of the cell house. "Everybody locked down," they said, barking out orders. I slowly laid down on my stomach as they approached me. Buddy was still blinded by the mace, but he laid down and put his hands behind his back too. After they manacled my wrist and escorted me towards the exit, I said one final thing to the control pod officer who had initiated the unnecessary events that had followed. Looking up at the control pod, I yelled, "That was for you, chump." So that was my chapter, turning a new leaf, chapter 4. Yeah, this early in my prison bit. This definitely right before I became a revolutionary, and I'm dealing with a lot of frustration with the pigs and stuff. I'm dealing with the fact that I lost my job, lost my girlfriend, dealing with just the being in a situation where I don't think nobody gets used to doing time in prison. You know what I mean? I think it's something that you just come to adapt to and to deal with the conditions and stuff. You know what I mean? But you know, the type of young guy I was always frustrated anyway. You know what I mean? So, you know, realizing like how oppressive the conditions there was and how they treated you, it was something that just was boiling over on for me. You know what I mean? Where I didn't feel like I was gonna be one of those tuck my tail type of inmates. Yes, a massa. I'm running back into my cell massa type of inmates. I never been that type of person. You know what I mean? I was always one of those individuals that was confrontational. If I felt like you disrespected me and you didn't respect my humanity, well, you're going to have to deal with my vengeance then, if that's the case. You know what I mean? So, you know, at this time of my time in prison, I'm really struggling to adapt, but not able to adapt to the oppression and the complete dehumanization, like how they would come into your cell and you wouldn't be doing nothing. You know what I mean? And they'd come in there and just totally tear up your cell. It was a time that they took, like I said in there, took my towel, my washcloth, threw it in the toilet. You know what I mean? So when I come back in, after being shaken down, I see my washcloth and towel in the toilet. It's a time I remember they eat my Hall's cough drops walking out the cell laughing. You know what I mean? They just feel like they could get away with anything, just like the pigs out here. You know what I mean? So, you know, and then, you know, the one part I talk about, Katrina says, do you feel the camaraderie of your cellies helped you get through close years in prison? Yeah, man. I feel like if it wasn't for Buddy, CC, Leon Benson, Roy Amos, my guy Keon, and whole host of other people that I came across in prison, it kept me grounded. You know what I mean? When you in there, a lot of times it's hard to stay focused on getting out of prison and trying to stay out of stuff, because it's like it's always stuff coming at you. Like even the situation with Gangster Brown, like dude was wrong for that. Like he was spreading a rumor on my guy Buddy, calling him a snitch because he didn't go to lockup, even though it was his first lockup. You know, this is in prison. You find yourself in situations where, you know, you stick with your guy when he's dealing with his own troubles. You know what I mean? Like that situation with Gangster Brown wasn't necessarily my issue, but because it was my guy's issue and I didn't want to see him have to suffer the humiliation of somebody denigrating his name and lying on his name. And in prison, that can put you in a real big problem with other prisoners and stuff when people say that you're a snitch and you ain't even did that shit. So, you know, for me to come to Buddy's aid and assistance on that was me just showing my loyalty and knowing if I was in the same position as him, I know he would have did the same for me. You know what I mean? And afterwards, it just shows like with Gangster Brown for apologizing for what he did. He realized he was in the wrong. Like we wasn't going to fuck up Gangster Brown, but he brought that to us. We was youngsters. This is a grown-ass man, big, cocky, Debo-looking dude, you know what I mean? But he was used to bullying people and treating people any type of way, you know what I mean? We was coming in there young, 19, 20 years old. Like, And for us, we was around all these people that did 20 and 30 years and, been down for a long time. So for us, the young guys coming in, we embracing each other, for like standing together and protection and everything. You know what I mean? And plus we was at a point in our bit that, being young and coming in there and experiencing this reality for the first time in our life and knowing that we gonna have to do like 20 years of this shit, it was like we had already made up our mind. Like people, no matter if they were prisoners or they the guards, they're gonna respect us. You know what I mean? They're gonna respect us. You know what I mean? But as you will see in time, as I go on in time, you gonna start to realize that the prisoners really wasn't the problems. Even though that situation with Gangsta Brown, I don't see no other way we could have resolved that because he kind of set his own course by that. But throughout the years, as I go in prison, I start to realize like prisoners I need to start to work with and dress things diplomatically because they really wasn't a problem. They was dealing with the same form of oppression that I was going over, dealing with, what Buddy was dealing with, CC was dealing with, you know what I mean? So we start to realize like in time that they weren't our enemies, you know what I mean? But what didn't change was the way the COs were and how the COs was treating us and how that continued throughout my whole time in prison. You know what I mean? First 3 months I was down, they killed a prisoner named Theodore McKenzie. You know what I mean? First 3 months I was in prison. Yeah, I see Kondo on there. You remember in Kondo, that affected me big time. Seeing that, not only was these guards that killed this brother, this was sergeants, lieutenants, captains, and even a counselor that was responsible for killing this mentally ill prisoner. And they covered it up. May 29th, 1999, I believe. And that was covered up all the way down to the governor downstate. You know what I mean? His family won a small settlement on it. But think about that coming into prison and you thinking that you coming in with a mentality like you did when you came off the streets from watching movies and stuff like that. You think you got to be in here, got to be hard against the prisoners. But then in your first 3 months in prison, you see the guards, they killed the brother and get away with it. That was my first Mike Brown. That was my first George Floyd. You know what I mean? And that had a big impact on my experience in prison. As I read on further along, as I go on, you're going to see how, like, that never settled, went over well with me. You know what I mean? The fact they killed this dude and got away with it. You know what I mean? And I'm in here for doing something that I did. You know what I mean? I robbed that bank. You know what I mean? Was in there sentenced at 39 years in prison. But they kill a person. I never killed no one in my life. But they can beat that because they're COs, because they have the state behind them. And, that's part of the injustice a lot of us feel out here around like stuff like George Floyd. You know what I mean? This is how the injustice we feel when we see pigs killing our people in our community and they be unarmed. It don't matter if they sleeping. It don't matter if they're like Philandro Castile in a car and he telling them I have a gun permit, still gun them down and nothing happened to him. You know what I mean? Or a situation like Eric Gardner, he trying to break up a fight. You know what I mean? And they end up intervening, choking him out, killing him. Or a situation like George Floyd, they have their knee on this man's neck for 8-9 minutes. You know what I mean? Come on, man. And we see too many times that stuff is happening out here. But I started to see this first in prison. You know what I mean? And that really transformed my way of looking at myself. That started to transform my way. I started looking at other prisoners. It started to make me realize, like, man, I need to eventually figure out, like, why, like, life is so fucked up against black people. Like, why are we having to deal with this shit? You know what I mean? It's like every generation has been dealing with different forms of this oppression, from slavery to segregation, now with mass incarceration. And when you in these type of situations, it's like, I don't know, you just feel frustrated and angry because you just see the double standards and the injustice constantly. You know what I mean? Katrina said something. If anyone else has any questions, definitely ask. You said their sentiments were the 13th Amendment to the United States Constitution abolished slavery and involuntary servitude except as punishment for a crime. Yeah, that's I think that was chapter 1. I talked about the 13th Amendment. And if y'all never got a chance to watch the 13th Amendment on Netflix, check that documentary out. It's a very, very good documentary. This is politicians themselves. Few activists on there speaking about this, but they themselves talk about the real nature of why the war on drugs and mass incarceration happened. You know what I mean? I think they could have went in a little bit deeper as far as like them bringing in drugs in this country. And that's another thing I want to speak to. I talk about Shorty off in there. And that's one of those ironic things I witnessed when I went in there is that the same drug culture that I saw out here was the same drug culture I saw in prison. You know what I mean? And the irony of it is that, like, when I came across Shorty was actually a dope thing. Like, Shorty would do every hustle. Like, he was like the character Ezell, real talk. Doing any little hustle, scheming, conning, motherfuckers, just trying to support his crack addiction. You know what I mean? But they gave him 50 years for drug possession and his drug problem on the outside. Shorty goes to prison and he's doing the exact same thing he was in prison doing. You know what I mean? Like, what sense does that make? You know, that was something that stood out to me immediately when I came down. It's like they got a lot of drug addicts off in here, people strung out on heroin and cocaine and stuff like that. Instead of sending these people to like treatment centers, which would have been better in their interest, you know what I mean? They sent them to prison. So they're around a lot of people that's in there for all kind of shit. And they're still doing the exact same thing in prison. You know what I mean? Still getting high, still smoking crack, still shooting up. You know what I mean? I just thought that was like one of the most ironic things ever, that they use prisons to send away people for drug habits, that those drug habits continue while they're in prison. Like, what sense does that make? And then they're going to let them out after 20 years. 20 years or 25 years after they gave them 50 years. You know what I mean? I think that's something that needs to change. That's something that we should definitely fight and struggle against. You know what I mean? How this war on drugs is really, took a lot of the most vulnerable people from our community that could have otherwise maybe got their life right if there was real programs to help them treat their drug addiction problems or something like that. You know what I mean? You said talk about violate. This is Mike Harris. It said talk about violations and sentencing increases and talk about how you made it out if you would. Okay. Yeah. So one thing, like for instance, Bill Clinton, but he was a major. I remember when people was calling him the first black president. And then I started reading and actually educate myself. Later on, not at this point, I'm still very uneducated at this point. I'm just dealing strictly with anger and bitterness and rage and standing up for myself, standing with my guys and stuff. This is how I was living at this time in my first few years in prison. But Bill Clinton, he was responsible for getting a lot of laws changed to increase the sentencing and stuff, you know what I mean? His wife, Hillary Clinton, so for all the Democrats out there, if you don't know your history of the people that you've been voting for, she was very instrumental as well. This is when they was talking about getting tough on crime in the 90s. The Republicans think tank, I want to say, I forget which one it was, but they came up with this study and they started calling black males super predators, you know what I mean? And Hillary Clinton and all of them was all on board with this stuff, you know what I mean? And they was pushing this super predator thing out in the news all the time to demonize the black community, you know what I mean? Black males in particular, you know what I mean? To get in order to pass longer sentences and more severe violations, you know. You even have, like, out of California, 3 strikes and all kind of different laws to put us away even longer, you know what I mean? But it's a lot of people like I talk about when I always start off this, I always bring up Leon Benson, who I dedicated this book to, Royal Amos. The result of these exorbitant sentencing, excessive sentences caused them to lock up a lot of innocent black people too. You know what I mean? Leon Benson was one of them. He came down in 98 when I came down. He came down for a crime that he didn't commit. And I'm going to keep on saying that till we get Leon Benson out. Free Leon Benson. 23 years for something he didn't do. But this is the excess of the war on drugs and them trying to get tough on crime and lock up people and stuff. You know what I mean? They don't care if they lock up innocent people. You know what I mean? Absolutely. White supremacy is super predator shit. Absolutely, Johnny G. Yeah, absolutely. But Royal Amos is another one. You know, he's been in there 15 years for something he ain't do. But all this excessive, getting tough on crime stuff, this got a lot of innocent people in there to this day. It's a lot of people that's on death row right now that's innocent. You know what I mean? Like Rodney, Billy Allen, like Billy Allen, like Rodney Reed. You know what I mean? And countless others. You know what I mean? So, if there's not any other questions, I just want to say that at this point, you know, in my book, you'll see, and I wanted to keep it real honest so you can see, like, the internal struggles I was going through in the beginning, even when I first came down and started doing my prison sentence, because I want you to see, like, what prison life is really like, how I internalize these things, how I try to adjust to it, the camaraderie, like Katrina was talking about, that kept me grounded, even though, you know, at times I just did see no way out a lot of times, you know what I mean? Struggling with depression at times, a whole lot, you know what I mean? Especially when my girlfriend, Peaches, got pregnant while I was in prison and stuff. That was, like, devastating, you know what I mean? But these are the real struggles that our brothers and sisters go through in prison. You know what I mean? I think if you have any comrades, friends, family that's in prison, that's doing time, like, definitely reach out to them. Send them a letter. You know what I mean? Let me see. Said, this Darren Hale, I might be late, but what was the first communist text you were introduced? And what stories inspired you the most, comrade? Much love and respect to you. Let me see. The first communist text. I don't want to give up everything because this is, like, really still the early part of my book. And like I said, I'm not conscious at this time. I'm just a rebel without a cause at this time in my prison bit. You know what I mean? But I would say that just because I kind of talk about that a lot. You know what I mean? And I think everybody know. The first communist that I came across was Fred Hampton. When I meet Fred Hampton for the first time puts me on a different trajectory. He takes that rebel without a cause and give it a revolutionary direction. You know what I mean? I see Marcellus on here. Buckley, I ain't seen you in a minute, man. I just want to give a shout out to you down there in St. Louis, I believe, still. But yeah, it was Fred Hampton. Like, he really was the biggest inspiration to me. You know what I mean? This was a person that was 21 years old when I was 21 years old. So it really resonated with me when I came across Fred Hampton. You know what I mean? Yeah, and Ruth Cosby Taylor said, it's amazing you survive. Absolutely. Sometimes I think about that when I look back in retrospect. You know what I mean? It's like all the stuff I've been through. It's like I seen a lot of people take their life in prison. I seen a lot of people go crazy. I seen a lot of people overdose. I seen people get killed. Well, I didn't personally see a lot of these things, but I was there in that environment and knew these people myself. You know what I mean? Lost a couple of people I know in there that I had a lot of respect about, and I'm going to talk about it later on in there. But yeah, sometimes I think about that, you know what I mean? But all of our experiences are teaching moments. I think we all have teaching moments. It's like, how do we use these teaching moments to better ourselves, to better our community, to better life, to challenge our conditions, to fight and be on the right side of history? You know what I mean? That's what I think all of our experiences should teach us, you know what I mean? Because I think everybody has a story. Some of our stories might have been rougher than other people, you dig what I'm saying? And it might be more you might look at a person's story as being more of an underdog in their life and stuff compared to yours. But to you, your story is a real tragedy too. It's a real underdog story that you emerged from and became a self-triumphant story for you and others, inspired to others. You know what I mean? That's what I want people to take away from mine. That's why I'm trying to keep it raw and uncut. You know what I mean? I don't hide nothing in here. I think the only way to tell autobiography is to put your life out there for everyone to see, for you to see your own self. Some things I wrote on paper, like I didn't even realize I even looked at it that way until I put it on paper. You know what I mean? And then when I read it, I was like, wow. So that's how I was really thinking back then, or that's how I was really viewing the world, or damn, you really hated yourself, or you hated life at this time, or this is the reason why you did this or that. You know what I mean? Yeah, writing an autobiography is a very cathartic process, therapeutic. It helps you to be self-introspective in a way that you have never dug deep down and realized different aspects about yourself. But I think the more, a person does a journal, write autobiographies and stuff like that, they're actually able to tap into a part of themselves that they didn't even realize, like the trajectory and of where they were going with their life, until they started to really uncover those things that kept them trapped. You know what I mean? Some of the handicaps you have when you a child, if you don't overcome them, if you don't break the umbilical cord of your conditions, of your poverty, of your upbringing, of the abuse or anything that you might have went through, you know what I mean? For some people, it might have been there was a woman that was molested or something by their uncle or their grandfather or something, you know what I mean? And if they stay stuck in that in a way where they don't therapeutically be able to release that tension and that gorilla on their back, it's hard to move on with their life. You know what I mean? It's hard to move on. And I think we all have things that we're going to have to, like, you're not going to necessarily get over, but they become less of a burden to you. They become less of an obstacle for you seeing something greater with your life, and less of a handicap and an anchor keeping you trapped in your conditions. You know what I mean? Let me read a couple more that this is Mike Harris again. He says, what chapter did you have the most difficulty processing in your writing? That's his first question. He said, what chapter did you have the most difficulty processing during your writing cycle, and why did it stand out above the others? Processing. Well, this is a little different because I actually wrote this book several different times. So I got to kind of go back in my mind to really think about which chapter that would be. You know what I mean? I think one of the biggest thing in general was writing and remembering different things. it was certain things that it took me a while. Like I had to go back and rewrite it once different information came to me, or I talked to somebody, or I sat back and really chronologically pieced it together in order to capture those times in history in a chronological way. You know what I mean? You forget certain things, but after you start to really contemplate it for a while and think about it and stuff, and you certain things start to slowly come back to you. You remember certain bits and pieces of conversations. You remember things that were happening at that time in your life. You know what I mean? But the biggest thing is not so much the events themselves, but capturing where you was psychologically and emotionally at that time in your life in a very vicarious way, where another person can feel like they're walking in your shoes and they experiencing those emotions and those emotions, those psychological scars you was wrestling with. You know what I mean? As you can see, how I write in a way where I want you to live in my shoes. I want you to be in my shoes and feel the struggle. And I'm going to speak about those, speak from the vantage point of how I was looking at life or how I was experiencing life at that moment in my life in order to connect it with, you know, how those different things was being resolved and transitioned to something higher later on. You know what I mean? So, yeah, I think that's probably the greatest difficulty is that. I also would say one of the greatest difficulties in writing autobiography is finding your voice. I think people think it's like a formula to writing a book, and it's not necessarily a formula. It's telling your story. Don't get so immersed in the words. Think of when you're writing an autobiography, it's like a painter with a white canvas, and all the words and emotions and psychological ways of looking at things or your feelings and stuff like that. That's the paint. And you use that paint just to paint those moments, capturing like a movie, those clips of your life and how those clips of your life and what they meant to you at that time. You know what I mean? If a person focuses on that, like a clip in a movement, trying to capture a moment in your life, and those moments are piecing together and they're telling a story, but they're giving a story of you as a person in development, a person in and trials and tribulations in your life, at times that you regress, or you the times that you are achieving things. These have to connect up in such a way where you seeing the picture of your life unfolding, but you're doing so in a way where you capture every moment of it in such a detailed way where you feel like by the time you get to the end, you feel validated that you had comprehensively captured the essence of who you were and how you saw things and how you develop at different stages in your life. You know what I mean? That's a difficulty too. That took a while to figure that out. He said, Mike Harris said, so I was walking in your shoes during the fight with the CO. You reflected that definitely. Ruth Cosby Taylor said, absolutely, you painted a vivid picture. Yeah, and that's all I wanted to do. You know what I mean? With especially in the beginning of the book, I wanted you to see, you know, the internal struggles. We all humans. A lot of people that think like leaders of movements and parties and revolutionary struggles. I was reading Huey P. Newton's book a little bit ago, and I'm reading another autobiography now. A lot of people don't realize we just as human as anybody else. We went through the same struggles as anybody else. There ain't no such thing as no gods and superstars and celebrities in this life. You know what I mean? We came to be who we are because of our struggles, because of our overcoming pain and trauma and overcoming them times in our life where we had to stand up to odds that was very felt insurmountable at times and stuff. You know what I mean? And in those struggles, it came to build fortitude of character. It came to develop integrity and a love for self, a love for others, a love for life. Like I didn't always have those things. You know what I mean? Like I talked about in the very beginning, I started off most of my life hating life. I just felt like life was meaningless. You know what I mean? But this is the reason why I always emphasize that we have to have our own education, because part of that comes from the fact that we was given a colonial mentality. I talk about that all the time. When you been given a colonial mind state, you start to look at the world in a very dysfunctional way. I might say you come to look at yourself in a very dysfunctional way. You start to have dysfunctional relationships with the people around you. You know what I mean? With that type of education. That's why I think it's so important that we have our own schools, our own educational schools and stuff. I'm going to answer a few more questions, and then I'm going to wrap it up, and we'll pick back up Monday. Let's see, Mike Harris also said, talk about things in your life since your release that you have turned back to your experiences inside to help you through on the outside. I would say that in the movement, it's always like times that are uncertain, or there's times when you feel like things has went backwards, or it's times when a lot of people remember when I was had resigned from the New African Black Panther Party back in August of 2020, when we was being infiltrated and people weren't listening to me and stuff. And then I had to try to figure out, like, man, where do I go from here? Like, that was a depressing moment for me. And I had to reach back to my time and pray. And I can speak about other times since I've been in the movement where I felt like after achieving so much, sometimes we take 2 steps back. But that's how revolution don't proceed in no straight line. And that's something that I always have to keep at the front of my mind. But the times that I feel like we had took 2 steps back after making 3 steps of progress, those were times where I had to reach back to my experience in prison and realize, like, you know, the way I recaptured my meaning. I read this book, and I'm going to leave it with this. I'm going to talk about this book later on, because this book was an important book that really, to this day, I live by. But it was a Jewish psychiatrist named Viktor E. Frankl. He was in a Nazi concentration camp during World War II. He wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning. Think of that. Man's Search for Meaning. What's my book called? Man's Search for Answers, Truth. My Search for Answers, Truth, and Meaning. That book had a very profound impact on me. That's why even my title of the book reflects his influence on me. Viktor E. Frankl. If you ain't never had a chance to read a book that's going to change your life, transform how you look at stuff, read Man's Search for Meaning. But anyway, he was a psychiatrist that was over in a Nazi concentration camp during World War II. This is the time that y'all know they was putting Jews in the gas chamber and stuff. Well, one of his biggest search was trying to figure out, why do we wake up every day? What do we get out of this life? You know what I mean? What is that intrinsic thing that we all are striving towards? Some philosophers and psychologists and sociologists said it was pleasure, you know, the will to pleasure. Other ones said it was the will to power. But Viktor Frankl, he found it was something bigger. He said it was the will to meaning. He found that during during the hardest time in his life, when he's seeing people dying all the time. He's also experiencing, he lost probably about 100 pounds and stuff like that. He said when people in there started to give up and they was about to die, you would know, because they would be over in the corner smoking a cigarette. And in the Nazi concentration camps, He said people don't smoke cigarettes. They only use cigarettes to trade, to get food, to survive. You know what I mean? But when he saw a person sitting over in the corner smoking a cigarette, he knew that person wasn't going to live too much longer because he has given up. He's not using cigarettes to survive, to get more food no more. He just gave up and said, hey, fuck it. You dig what I'm saying? I'm letting everything go. And he said when he looked at those individuals, they had an emptiness in their eyes. You know what I mean? But then he used to see some of the other individuals under the harshest conditions. Imagine that. Under the harshest conditions, and the snubble and snow and blizzard weather. You know what I mean? And you only getting a bowl of soup that only has a few pieces of meat in there and mostly vegetables and stuff. And it's not really nutritious. You know what I'm saying? But he was coming across individuals during that time in the Nazi concentration camp that actually still had a genuine smile on their face. They still actually had humor in their laughter and their voice and stuff. And he was like, what is the difference between the person over in that corner that's smoking that cigarette and is about to die in a couple of days because he's lost all hope in it? He just gave up, you know what I mean? And this person that's over here don't know if they're going to the gas chamber tomorrow, don't know what happened to their wife and kids or family and or what's going to happen to them, but they can still have humor. They can still wake up every day and want to live. You dig what I'm saying? He said the difference between that person that was smoking a cigarette and had given up, and then the other person's people that still wake up every day and have a desire to live is that one person, as one side had still meaning, whereas the ones that had given up, they lost meaning. They lacked meaning. You dig what I'm saying? And that was profound to me. He said that people find meaning in several different ways. Some through love, some through a cause, some through the art and the things they create. You dig what I'm saying? For him, he said some people woke up every day because they just wanted to be reunited with their wife. They didn't know if their wife was still alive, but they knew that they wanted to reunite with their wife. They didn't want to die without being able to spend those last years with her or their husband or with their kids. You know what I mean? Or you had people that was in their like different communists that was standing their ground, and because they still believed in their ideals and that cause, like Che Guevara. You know what I mean? Che Guevara died heroically all the way to the end. When he knew they was going to take him out, he still had his head up high. You dig what I'm saying? Because he still had meaning. You know what I mean? For Viktor E. Frankl, he said his will to meaning is that he realized the answer was not the will to power. The answer to that question was not the will to pleasure. It was the will to meaning. We wake up every day and want to live because we have meaning to live. You dig what I'm saying? No matter if it's, in my case, waking up because I got a beautiful wife that I love very dearly. One of the reasons I woke up every day in prison wanting to live is because I wanted to write this book. This was my will. This was one of my will to meanings, like Viktor Frankl. I wanted to capture my life in a way to help this person that was still trying to figure out life, try to help other people figure it out quicker. You dig what I'm saying? I wanted to help them to realize a revolutionary vision. I wanted them to not have to experience what I had experienced. You dig what I'm saying? That was a big will to meaning to me. Also, I woke up every day in there because I wanted to be a part of the Black Panther Party movement that I figured it was going to come about in this country. Before I even knew about the new African Black Panther Party, I wanted to create one myself. You dig what I'm saying? Because I was so inspired by the Black Panthers that I was like, man, this is like the way they live is how I want to live my life. So whenever I get in them, we have like different times in the movement where we have setbacks and stuff. When I look back to my time in prison, I ask myself, what are those will to meanings that keep me motivated and keep me passionate and making me want to wake up every day to live another day? You know what I mean? And that's some of my will to meanings. You know, my family, my wife, pushing a consciousness to the masses where they can make transformations themselves. And it's revolution. You know what I mean? Every day I wake up, I'm very optimistic we gonna win in our generation. You know what I mean? If I don't get to see it or not, I feel like my life is gonna be a contribution to another generation seeing us ending this capitalist imperialist system. You dig what I'm saying? Ending this modern day form of slavery once and for all. For 400 years, our people have suffered from this. And for me to make a contribution to ending something that has caused so much misery, so much destruction, so much disassociation and alienation and all kind of things with humanity, being able to contribute to bringing that motherfucking system down gives me a whole lot of meaning. You dig what I'm saying? I wake up every day thinking about that. You know what I mean? Because I know one day it's going to come. One day it's going to come. So that's my answer to you, Mike Harris. I wake up every day with that, you know what I mean, that I really wrenched out of my experience in prison and I applied to the present, you know what I mean? So even if they can ban this book in all Indiana prisons as they want, you know what I mean? But this right here is going to help transform a lot of other people and stuff because like Malcolm X and George Jackson and a lot of people in the past that inspired me, I know that's going to inspire a lot of people to make a different trajectory with their life. You know what I mean? So that's I'm going to end it on there, you know. That was a good question though, Mike Harris. I appreciate that. You know, but yeah, I hope a lot of people got something out of this as we go on. I think you're going to get a lot more out of it because like I said, the title of the book is My Search for Answers. I haven't even started to search for these answers yet. For truth and for meaning. And when I uncover that and start to talk about stuff, it's going to challenge a lot of y'all. Imagine y'all being in the cell 18 years, you know what I mean? And most of it 23 hours a day. You know what I mean? Over 10 years of my 18 years, I did it in solitary confinement. You know, 23 hours a day. No real human contact. You dig what I'm saying? What type of person you going to come out if you can read books, countless books all the time and study and try to answer any question you ever had in your life? You know what I mean? How would you have done your time? Well, you about to find out when you read this book how I did my time and why I'm the person I am today. Why I do show this sense of fortitude and strength and conviction and perseverance today. Because after going through that shit, you dig what I'm saying? I feel like, man, I can go through anything. You know what I mean? So that's what always picks me up, keep me dedicated. I got to get my guy Leon Benson out too. So I want to end it with that. You know, Leon Benson, again, in prison 23 years for something he ain't do. A soldier, you know what I mean? Royal Amos, 15 years for something he ain't do. The state of Indiana know he ain't do. Free Leon Benson, free Royal Amos. We'll be picking this back up Monday at 7 p.m. Eastern time. So if you enjoy this, definitely come out, bring your friends, family, whoever, you know what I mean? Your little cousin that might be falling by the wayside, bring him on here. He need to hear this shit too. You know, he'll be able to relate to this, you know, and then when he see that it ain't all about beating up motherfuckers and beating up guards, but it's actually going to start teaching you how, showing ones how I start transforming myself, you know what I mean? It's going to have the same effect on him, you know what I mean? So bring another guest with you next time on here. Because we have to teach each other and better ourselves. We are our own solutions. You know, not the Democratic Party, not the Republican Party. We, the people at the bottom, is the only solution to our problems in our community. So with that, I want to say all power to the people, boots on the ground.